Well, just about every flower, every plant is going to produce a flower at some point in its life. Some might not do it right away. There can be a juvenility period in many kinds of plants. But in general, most adult trees, shrubs, flowers, plants, they are going to flower at some point, and they will generally produce pollen. And that pollen, depending on the kinds of plants, is more, in some cases, more readily blown around by the wind. In some cases, it's not very much blown around by the wind. It might be very sticky and not move around except by insects and so forth touching it. But when we talk about trees, they're up in the air. We have a lot of wind in South Dakota, so it's very easy for many kinds of tree species for that wind to pick up that pollen and move that all over the place. So if you go outside and you happen to be allergic to that particular kind of pollen, it may affect you. Well, goldenrod is a kind of a late summer flowering plant. People see it, sometimes they just see it and they already think their nose starts running and their eyes are watering. It's like, oh, that goldenrod is terrible, it's causing all this hay fever for me. But goldenrod has a very sticky kind of pollen. It's very attractive to insects that like to eat that pollen, but it doesn't blow around. However, at the same time, ragweed, which is probably one of the worst pollen-producing plants that we see, and there is a lot of it out there in the landscape and out in the countryside, that pollen is very light, flies around in the air very easily. So even though goldenrod, oh, that's what's causing my problems, it's really the ragweed that's growing down below that people might not even notice, and they're walking through it. Goldenrod gets a bad rap, but it just happens to be the showy plant when the ragweed is down there below causing the real problem. It's not just plant pollen. You can also have spores from fungi and molds, especially after the snow melts and you've got dead grass, you've got dead leaves, and if it's a wet spring in particular, those things can start feeding on that decaying material. They release spores, those spores get up into the air, and that can also cause an allergic reaction for some people. So it's not just tree pollen or plant pollen, it can also be spores from other kinds of organisms. If you have problems, check with an allergist. Watch your local television shows. They often will give you what the pollen counts and what the allergy probabilities are, and that can give you some better idea as to if you're going to be suffering from one thing or another. And once you find out what you're allergic to, that's going to be a better idea of, okay, I've got to really watch it the first part of June because that's when this plant is in bloom. Might want to stay indoors more frequently or use some of that allergy medicine.